Hello, I'm Eric Devereaux, and today we're going to be talking briefly about another chapter in my textbook, Methods of Policy Analysis. This part of this video sequence has been looking at different ways to diagnose public policy processes that are producing results that are deemed less than satisfactory by your client, by your boss, by your organization, and putting you on the road through diagnosis to some form of treatment, some sort of policy response that can try to move the situation to a more preferable outcome, more preferable result. So in this next chapter of my book, we're going to be talking about markets. So let me first off just share the first page of the chapter so you can just see that. This is chapter 7, Market Processes. And this entire chapter is devoted very briefly to going over aspects of markets that matter for public policy and helping you to think about the different issues that can arise with markets. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move, as I have before, to a device that lets me draw for you. So I'm going to begin drawing for you now some things to think about when you talk about markets. So the first point I want to make here that's really important is that a market is a process. And this entire section of my book is focused on process modeling. A market is a process. It is not a static thing. It is an active process in which you have buyers, you have sellers, you have products, and you have services. And they are negotiating between the buyer and the seller about selling a product or service, the buyer buying a product or service based on price. And in classic market theory, the price of what is being sold, the price that is paid, is extremely important because it encapsulates a huge amount of information about the nature of the market transaction. And economists generally see prices as representing the crucial piece of information you need to have to understand what is occurring inside a market. Now, some of you may have taken various courses in microeconomics, and most of the types of programs that I have taught in, public policy programs, public administration programs, have at least one required course in intermediate microeconomics. And you may have taken those courses, or you may be getting ready to take them. And you'll learn various things about how markets are supposed to work with a variety of techniques and tools that economists have developed. And I'm not going to focus on equations or graphs or such things. I'm going to focus here first and foremost on the 5 conditions that are necessary for a market to be efficient. There are 5 conditions for an efficient market. Now, an efficient market is one in which we don't see any negative things resulting from the market transactions. We only see positive benefits both for the participants and for our society. I want to point out that market efficiency is only one criteria that public policy analysts might use to look at a market. It is not the only criteria. It might not even be the most important one, but it is the one that economists focus on. So there are 5 conditions for an efficient market, and all 5 of these conditions have to be met. And if any one of these conditions is not met, then you might have a reason or a rationale for government to go in and try to remedy the situation through public policy. And in the United States, where I'm teaching this material, where this textbook was written, in the United States, we have a negative view of government. Government has to have a rationale for stepping in and intervening in a market. There has to be a reason for government to do this. Otherwise, our society generally comes from the premise that we should leave markets alone. And we should only intervene in markets when they've been shown to have some type of problem, or as we often label it, a market failure. And those failures can be related to these 5 conditions. So the first condition for a market to be efficient is there must be many buyers and sellers. There must be many. Now, how many is many? Well, that's actually a tricky question. It's a matter of degree. Certainly, if you have thousands or millions of them, that's one matter. But if you only have 10 or 5, that's an entirely different one, right? And most importantly, none alone can set price. Neither a buyer or a seller has the power to determine prices. Prices are established in the marketplace through the negotiations of many, many buyers and sellers, and both of them have to abide by the consequences of that. So you might not be able to sell something for what you would like because the market simply won't bear that price. You might not be able to purchase something at the price that you want because the market is telling you that, in fact, that good or that service is much more expensive. And no matter where you look, you can't find a less expensive alternative. Okay? So that's condition number one. Many buyers and sellers, no one has power in the marketplace to set prices alone. The second is that there must be identical and perfect information about what is being sold available to everybody. Both buyers and sellers must have identical and perfect information about what is being sold, or else this market will not function perfectly. I have been in situations as a buyer where I had information the seller did not have, and the seller discovered later basically that I'd gotten away with a far lower price than I should have paid because the seller was not aware of something in the marketplace. I didn't do anything unlawful or unethical. I just knew that the seller of the good was not aware of its true value in some way. And not my job as the buyer to tell them that. The market is supposed to tell them that, but they did not have perfect information. I've been in other situations where I did not have the information necessary and I paid too much. And probably you've been in that situation as well. Sometimes there is not shared identical perfect information about the market, and that results in a distortion. Okay. Mm-hmm. The third is that consumption of the good. Consumption denies other buyers the good or service at that time, at least. When I buy something and I consume it, I take it off the marketplace and other buyers and sellers cannot have it, at least at that moment. Maybe at another time they could, but at that moment they cannot. My consumption of this affects everybody else. Okay. The fourth is that purchase is required. To access a good or service. I cannot have it for free. And I cannot have it if somebody else buys it. So if somebody else buys it, I can't have it. I can only have it if I buy it. Okay. If I could get it for free, then that's going to be an issue in the marketplace. And the fifth condition is that all consequences must be captured in the price. This is why economists focus on prices and the price setting mechanisms, because from their perspective, all of the consequences of the market transaction, anything that really matters even in the longer term, must be captured in the price paid at the time the transaction occurs. If that doesn't happen, we might have problems. So let's keep these 5 things in mind, and let's go through very quickly some of the things that can happen in a marketplace that can result in the need, or at least the perceived need, or the actual intervention by a government in the marketplace. So the first problem that arises all the time, and these are all different types of what are often referred to as market failures. Okay. These market failures produce government responses. Okay. The first market failure that is often discussed is monopoly or something like that. Oligopoly, monopoly or oligopoly, or there's other things that go by these names, monopoly, oligopoly. The point is, one or few producers can dictate prices to the market. So there are many situations in public policy where you have monopolies. My book talks about several of them, including electric utilities, where often a community only has one electric utility and everybody has to deal with buying electricity from that electric utility. The book talks about what the sort of science fiction like alternative would be thousands of electrical companies, each one running power lines down your street. Is not something most of us look forward to. We only have one electric utility. There are some reasons why monopolies develop. So there are natural monopolies. Natural monopolies develop when it is very expensive to start a business and produce its products. And probably the most prominent natural monopoly that we deal with are airline manufacturers. Basically, each major industrial country on Earth only has one now. We have Boeing, for example, in the United States. Europe has Airbus. This is a situation of natural monopoly because of the incredible expense associated with building airliners. Another potential natural monopoly has to do with spacecraft launches, although we now have about four different companies, private companies in the United States that are producing spacecraft that can launch vehicles into orbit, which is a huge change from when it used to be only the government did it. Now we have at least four. Um, and so you have natural monopolies that develop. And then you also, of course, have political monopolies. Political monopolies develop because an industry gets the power to influence the government to basically protect it from competition and give it some sort of monopoly position in the marketplace. What happens under monopoly or also under oligopoly is that prices are higher than they should be. There's been accusations here where I live in Chicago that apartment rental companies renting huge apartment buildings have been using a variety of online platforms for listing apartments for rent, actually to fix prices behind the scene and to communicate with each other about rent prices and keep rent prices above where the market naturally would go. And you can sort of immediately understand why a government might want to intervene and say, no, you can't do that. You're raising the cost of housing so much, you're really damaging the surrounding society by forcing people to pay so much for their housing when they should be able to pay less in a free market. Okay, so this is a very classic one: is monopoly. Another classic market failure that we deal with in public policy all the time are information asymmetries. Information asymmetries occur when one party or the other in the transaction knows something that the other does not. And I mentioned I've been in these situations before, but probably the most prominent information asymmetry example that we have in the United States or in other countries is pharmaceuticals. So the fact is, the prescription drugs that we buy sometimes have unintended negative health consequences. And we may not know about those unless someone can step in and force the manufacturer to divulge them. And increasingly, governments do this all over the world, that they must tell the public about known medical complications that could arise from a new prescription drug, even if those complications are very rare. So nowadays, you see ads for prescription drugs that list a wide range of known possible negative consequences of taking those drugs. At the same time, most people will never have that happen. Only a few will ever have that happen, but they have to divulge so that consumers can try to make an educated decision about whether to use the pharmaceutical, and that affects its price. Okay. When information is asymmetric and one party knows more than the other, price is affected. Either price may be too low. In the example I gave, I purchased something where the seller didn't realize its value, or I buy something for too much because I didn't realize it wasn't as valuable as I thought. It affects the price up or down in a way that gets away from having an efficient market. And so governments can step in, of course, and try to fix this in a variety of interventions to force the information that's available to the consumer or to the producer to be more accurate. There's other examples in my book where consumers might take advantage of knowledge that the sellers don't have. Insurance markets are the most prominent example of that. Okay, and then of course there's public goods. Public goods are often been talked about the most in public policy courses. Public goods are goods where um, um, everyone can benefit without purchase. Everyone can benefit without purchase, and there's basically unlimited consumption, meaning what I consume does not affect what you consume. So a canonical example of this is national defense. When you produce national defense, everybody is defended inside their national borders by the military. And if you don't pay for it, you still benefit from it. The problem with public goods is that the private marketplace generally doesn't like to supply these, or it doesn't supply enough of them, because private producers feel that they cannot profit from their productive process. They can't sell the goods. You can't sell clean air very easily. You can't sell national defense. You can't sell a variety of public goods. And so governments have to step in and do these. Public parks are another example, just unrestricted accessible public parks. Private producers aren't going to do this. They can't charge for admission. So the market just doesn't exist. We need these things. We need national defense. We need public parks. We need a variety of other public goods. And this is one of the dominant justifications for governments existing in the first place. And then you have externalities. Externalities are the consequences of a market that are not captured in the price. Consequences that are not captured in the price. And the most famous of these is pollution. So often industries are allowed to pollute the air or pollute the water to some degree and not have to pay to clean up the air or clean up the water. And therefore, they are allowed to sell goods and services to the public at a lower price than that price would be if they had to include some component for paying to clean up the pollution. Okay, so pollution is the most example. Different forms of pollution that come from industry is the most famous example of an externality. But anytime that a market has consequences that are not captured in the prices being paid by consumers or charged by the producers, then you can get an externality. You can also have positive externalities. You can have benefits from the marketplace that are felt in society, and the producer cannot charge for those benefits. They just accrue. So, for example, a private developer that goes into a neighborhood and redevelops a neighborhood and makes it much more attractive and safe and livable than it was before, can produce a variety of surrounding benefits for the communities adjacent to that development that are positive externalities, and the producer just cannot charge anybody for those benefits at all. The producer might end up raising the housing values of the people that live adjacent to what they've done, and the producer is not going to get to benefit from that increase in housing values. So externalities often are dealt with by command and control regulation more than anything else. This is command and control regulation. Command and control regulation is when governments tell industries you cannot pollute, or you can only pollute this much, you can only pollute a little. You have to put things to clean the smoke coming out of your smokestacks. You must put clean water back into the rivers after you take the water out to use it in your factories. We will check to see if you do this, and if you don't do this, we will fine you. And that's called command and control. There's been a variety of other public policies that have been developed in different ways to try to use alternatives, even market-based alternatives to command and control. I'm not going to focus in great detail on those, but they've all been trying to deal with externalities. You can read about some of them yourself, and you'll discover, for example, that a market-based solution was used to try to address acid rain that resulted from sulfur dioxide being put in the atmosphere by coal-fired power plants. And actually, Chicago was the centerpiece of where that market experiment was tried, and it was very successful. Okay, so those are externalities. So markets really matter in public policy analysis. And one of the things, so one of the things that policy analysts do, policy analysts often diagnose market failures. That's what we often do. We look at a particular problem. Something is coming out in a way that we think is less preferable. We will try to see if it can be matched to a type of market failure. Later on in my book, later on in this series of videos, we'll be looking at some well-known treatments that economists have advocated for trying to resolve market failures. So what you do is you match the problem to a market failure, and that almost immediately gives you a set of alternatives you might use to respond to that market failure, especially if you can get the political will, public support, and other things necessary to actually try to use something like command and control regulation or some other intervention to deal with the marketplace. Anyway, that's a brief look at what's going on in this chapter of my book on looking at markets as processes. And I want to really stress that markets are processes. They need to be diagnosed as processes. They can be intervened with as processes. And that's why they are part of using process models of different forms to try to diagnose public policies. Let me stop there. Once again, I thank you for your attention to this video. I hope that you will read the chapter in my book. Again, I will put a description, in the description, I will put a link to the book so that you can access it online for free. And there'll be future videos in this series that continue down, working their way through the chapters in the book. And very soon, transitioning away from diagnosing public policy problems to thinking about different approaches to responding to them. Again, thank you very much, and see you next video.